Welcome back to my Olympic series of Olympic Day talks, which will cover every Olympic Games for which I have an item of clothing. This one is from Torino 2006, the second Olympic Winter Games experience I had, and remarkable because I found this wonderful snowboarding hoodie, which I still love 14 years later and wear it all the time. And if there's one thing that really marked off Torino's Games, it was the attention to design, quality, innovation, and technology. And the textiles were no exception. The clothing range that you could obtain at Torino were second to none. And yet it was also a games that tried to dispel, or rather expand, people's ideas about what Italian culture involves. But yes, certainly some of the big names were there. Ferrari didn't only just design the torch that was carried around the country, it also had its own vehicles in the opening ceremony, spinning around doing donuts, surrounded by ice skaters who were carrying fire. It was a real revolution in terms of the aesthetics of the ceremony itself. And I think Torino managed, perhaps not since maybe Albertville, the Olympic Games in Albertville, where we see this attention to aesthetics in such great regard. It was really a beautiful Olympic Games. It was also the Games where I discovered the medals plaza. So what you may not appreciate is at the Olympic Winter Games, you have a real challenge of bringing everyone together. And bear in mind that the Olympic Games mission is bring everybody together in one place. But of course, if you're an Olympic host city, you kind of want to make sure that the city itself has some prominence, that it's not just the mountain venues. And you do that for many reasons. You want to attract tourists into the place. You want to make sure that the venues that you build still have a legacy. And of course, if you do that in the city, in the mountain rather, you may not be able to access the populations of people that you'd want to bring. So what we have is an Olympic Games which has essentially a split site. And what they've done with the Olympic Medals Plaza is bring the athletes back down from the mountains into the city to receive their medals. So they retain an element of the celebration of the victors by bringing it into the city itself. And what's also lovely about it is you can access tickets for these by different means. So it's not simply that you have to buy a ticket through the usual channels. You can often access these tickets for free, which allows people access to those Olympic athletes in ways that otherwise just wouldn't be accessible. So the Medals Plaza has become an Olympic venue in its own right, because it simply is staging those ceremonies where the medals are received, but also interspersing it with kind of concerts, musicians, prominent people that turn it into a really great gig to go and see. And so I think Torino did that really well. It managed to achieve something with that venue that probably hadn't been achieved before. But it was also a place that I discovered the art of pin trading. This is again something that you can't appreciate if you never go to the games, but it's an event that really is characterized by the desire for connecting people from nations. And one of the ways that they do that is by pin trading, small little pins that have maybe logos of the Olympic nation or of the particular Olympic Games. And there are people that have done this for decades. You can find people that have racks and racks of Olympic pins stretching back 100 years almost. It's really an insight into history and I guess a kind of obsessive collectors that operate around the sports world, of which the Olympics is not an exception at all. I think the Torino Games was also a special place for me because I learned a lot more about that wider desire for a nation to re-articulate its place in the public imagination. Torino was a place within Italy that allowed some scope for reinterpreting itself through the Olympic Games it created. And for Italy, that was very much about the region of Piemonte. It was about thinking through this place in terms that don't just correspond to the stereotypes of Italian culture. And so one of the ways that they do this at the Olympic Games is to create what are called a look of the city, a way of visualizing the city aesthetically, so that when you walk around it, you get a sense of that presence and that identity. And one of the things that you also sort of notice is how the Olympic Games, what happens in the venues is just a small fraction of what happens in the Olympic city itself. And it's useful to think about the Olympic Games not as this kind of collection of sports events, but as a festival that descends on a city for nearly nearly a month, really. Even though the games are 17 days, there's so much happening around the city over certainly a month period, especially because the Paralympic Games take place as well, close alongside the Olympic Games. It's a non-stop jamboree of activities. You don't need tickets to go to the Olympic Games. You can actually access tickets when you get there, but there's so much more for you to do. There's so much happening in what are called the live sites at the Games, places that are set up for people that don't have tickets to access big screen experiences where they can watch the sports collectively, but also enjoy other activities. And there are so many shows that are put on beyond just the sports themselves, that it's a place where you can have a good time, even if you don't have the money you need to get into the venues. In fact, if you're able to get to the city at all, you can find something to do, even if it's a day trip. And I really encourage that. If you can get to the games, even for a day, do so. You'll learn so much more about the world and appreciate so much about how diverse it is. The bringing together of those nations is the core value that the Olympic Games brings to the world, I think. And it often gets kind of caught up in lots of other political, economic, social issues. But, you have to remember that what the Olympic Games is really about is bringing people together. And that global conversation is the biggest part of it. Hope you enjoyed it. Speak to you soon.